Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here. My name's Carolyn Pugsley. I'm the head of corporate for Herbert Smith Freehills. Before I get too far into my welcome, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and future. HSF is in its first year of sponsoring this Law Apps course, and we are very delighted, or were delighted, when Gary reached out to us about getting involved, because we've been tracking the course and the students that have come through the course for a while, because it's fair to say I think this course is building the skills in its students that we are looking for in our graduates and people we want to bring into HSF. And they are things like customer and client focus. They are things like proper empathetic questioning and listening. And it's doing it in a framework of helping to solve real world problems for community organisations that are doing great things. So we are delighted to be involved. I personally am incredibly excited to see what the student groups who've been working so hard have planned for us here tonight. But without further ado, I think I will hand over to Professor Pip Nicholson, who will give a welcome from the Melbourne Uni perspective. Thanks, Pip.
Welcome to you all. I can't begin to tell you what a pleasure it is to be here tonight. I do a lot of activities, but I rarely look in my calendar and think I'm going to spend 2 hours with people who've spent 12 weeks being creative. So absolute pleasure to be here. I would particularly like to acknowledge HSF for their generous support, both of the awards night tonight and this wonderful venue and this generous hospitality, but also for their very generous support of the subject that you've all just about completed, Law Apps this year. I'd also like to thank the technology provider Neota Logic for their continued support of the subject, which, as many of you would know, has been offered at the Melbourne Law School since 2015. I'd like to acknowledge my dear colleague Gary Cazalet, from whom you're going to hear a bit more shortly, and also Mayred Murray, who sort of has done a lot of logistical support at our end. A particular thanks to our panel of judges, which has blossomed in the course of the day. So Steve Bell, Fiona McClay, Bill Moore and I are looking forward to a wonderful night of presentations. Just briefly, and by way of background for the few of you in the room who might not be entirely familiar with Law Apps, it is a subject that the Law School's been offering under Gary's stewardship since 2015, and it forms a part of a suite of subjects that the Law School offers that deals with, legal disruption through innovation and technology. And we're challenging our students through it to navigate the complex ethical, legal and social implications of the digital disruption. And then we ask you to design and build something that presents as a solution, and this year for the first time working in combination with not-for-profit organisations who in fact identified with you the particular project on which you would spend your time. And so I think we'd also like to thank those who worked with us in the delivery of the subject in this way for the first time in 2018, particularly the Disability Justice Advocacy, Fitzroy Legal Service, Moonee Valley Legal Service, Housing for the Aged Action Group, Prisoners Legal Service Queensland, just wonderful to have some geographic diversity as well in the not-for-profit sector with whom we were collaborating, Visa Cancellations Working Group and Victoria Legal Aid. From the names themselves you can begin to see a flavour of the diversity of the projects. Students met with key staff from each organisation in order to understand the relevant needs and concerns of their clients and the wider non-lawyer public for whom the apps were ultimately designed to serve. I look forward, with my fellow judges, to the evening ahead. Gary, we're in your hands.
Thank you, Pip. Well, I am Gary Cazalet, and I've had the great pleasure of teaching the students that are in the audience today. I'd like to welcome the judges and the students and the representatives of all of the organisations that are here today. Thank you for your support. And I want to echo Pip's comments to thank Herbert Smith Freehills for their support for the subject. Today is an opportunity, or tonight is an opportunity for the students to show you what they've been working on over the semester. They have been working extremely hard. They may have lots of makeup on, both men and women, tonight, just to show how hard they've been working and they're not too tired. There's been a lot of all night over the last week. The primary motivation of this subject and the apps that they have been building is to make justice more accessible and more comprehensible in our community. With the support of Freehills, we have been able to expand this subject this year from 20 students in previous years to 30 students this year. It was oversubscribed. It's oversubscribed for next year as well, and we've doubled the number of times it's going to be taught next year, and it's still oversubscribed. That tells us at the law school that the students recognise how important the things that they are learning in this subject are, but it also tells us, because students are aware of what happens at the end of their degree, that employers are interested. And you've already heard from Carolyn about how important the types of things that they've been learning in this subject are for employers, and it's really wonderful. The students have heard from a wide range of speakers over the semester, and they are noted in the program. I just wanted to single out one of the speakers that we had, which was Dr. Margaret Hagan from Stanford Law School, from the Legal Tech Design Lab there. She taught the students, in conjunction with me, around user-based design. So a lot of the work that's been done over the semester is human-centred design, making sure that the design of these applications absolutely works for the people that they are designed to help. I'd also like to thank Neota Logic as well, John Lord, Julian Ubergang and Kenny Yamanda. I also want to thank Bess and Jessie, who's helped me over the entire semester as my teaching assistant. The judges tonight are Steve Bell, partner at Herbert Smith Freehills. You've heard from Pip Nicholson, our Dean, Fiona McClay, the Legal Services Commissioner, and Bill Moore, the MD of Walden International, who's joining us from Silicon Valley as a late entrant. Each team will have 9 minutes to present their applications, followed by 3 minutes of questions from the judges. So without further ado, we're going to move on to the presentations, and the first presentation is the Disability Discrimination Information App for Disability Justice Australia. The students can come up. Next slide. Slides. Is that one? It's of course. No, I've got a glass. Yep.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sophia Griffiths-Mark, and I have formed part of the DGA Law App team. Beside me, I have Alexander Meredith, Chloe Fabro, Camille Bentley-McCordrick, and Roland Compton-Stroughton. We'd also like to take this opportunity to thank a few people that have made our app possible, to Trevor Carroll and Fiona Downing from DJA, to Carol Swain and Louise Hockey from Scope, and Bridget Griffiths-Mark for assistance, and of course to Gary Cazalet for his assistance. So our client, Disability Justice Australia Incorporated, DJA, provides advocacy and support services to people who have ongoing needs as the result of a disability. Ultimately, DJA seeks to work with people living with disability to support their needs, to champion their rights and interests, and address and resolve related issues, such as discrimination based on disability. Our brief. We were tasked with developing an app that would help users in two respects. Firstly, to help them better understand discrimination as it relates to the law and give some users insight into their rights. Secondly, to help DJA triage requests for support by providing the functionality to allow users to start the process of drafting complaints, which then DJA can pursue with them. Our vision is to increase justice through consolidating relevant information and making it useful. DJA drew our attention to how information on where to get help for disability discrimination is spread across multiple websites in inaccessible formats. We're bringing it together and making it easier for the user to actually support and help themselves. So I'm now going to hand over to Al, and he will talk through how we went about achieving our brief.
Thanks, Sophia. So firstly, you would have seen before, we just jumped past it, but we basically want to set the scene with our use case because the first meeting that we had with Trevor and Fiona, they gave us an example of a typical scenario where somebody might need to use an application like what we've developed. And so for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to call this person Jane. She's 28 years old, lives in Carlton. She lives with a visual impairment and a cognitive impairment as well. And so we'll use this as an example throughout to sort of road test the application. So obviously with an application like this, the most important thing is the users and their unique needs. And so we were really cognizant of the fact that we'd have to do a lot of testing to really figure out which assumptions we might have made that we need to rethink in developing the application. So Trevor and Fiona were really helpful in bringing us up to speed with some of the unique accessibility requirements of the community. And then we went along to DJA to their annual general meeting, and we actually presented them with this booklet. And we ran through a series of questions. We ran through 13 questions and interviewed a large sort of pool of potential users, and we collated data on basically how they responded to the various components. So things like buttons, the typeface, and other elements of the style and design, and also the content that they'd like to see. So basically, these are some of the things that we ran through, and these all informed our ultimate design decisions. We also were in ongoing communication with DJA throughout the process because we appreciated that it was an iterative process and it'd be necessary to go back to DJA. So I'm now going to pass on to Chloe to talk a little bit more about the Easy English functionality and the build.
Thanks, Al. So as my fellow development team members have highlighted, our primary focus was to tailor our app to an extremely unique client base. And this need to be accessible really was the main driving force behind all of our major decision-making processes. And I'm now going to run everyone through 3 fundamental aspects of our app pertaining to the content creation and general build of the app that we undertook to truly go above and beyond for DJA. The first, of course, was the transitional process from standard to Easy English. For those who may not be aware, Easy English is a form of accessible communication that focuses on using simple and concise language to highlight key information, and it uses a combination of words and images to help readers disseminate information that they normally may not be able to. This form of communication was especially important to allow the app to be utilised by users with learning and intellectual disabilities, people just like Jane. To provide this complete alternate pathway in our app, we were fortunate enough to consult with Scope, which is another organisation that provides numerous disability support services, and they were extremely generous in providing us with an Easy English guide, as well as other sources that helped us inspire our app. For the visual aids that you will see momentarily, we used a platform called Boardmaker to find appropriate images, and we then worked tirelessly to caption these so that they were appropriate and in line with the exact content that you'll see in our app. In short, the Easy English content was a vital inclusion to our app, as the language choices and visual aids really help to form the foundation of meeting the accessibility needs of our users. Secondly, we created both standard and Easy English video and audio content ourselves as a team for the app to create a personal connection to the user and ensure they feel that they are interacting and communicating with the app, and most importantly, having their voices heard. These aspects became another key inclusion in our app as a result of feedback from our user-based testing, as Al discussed a few moments ago. The audio content in particular was recorded so that the app can, in essence, talk to the user. And again, this was done to ensure a real personal feel to the app was achieved. And we are pleased to say that voice recordings are available for every single screen on our app, both in standard and Easy English. Finally, our app is also set up to enable Auslan functionality. And this gives our app the capacity to broaden our user base and, most importantly, to further increase access to justice for all. And now I'm thrilled to hand over to Camille and Roland, who are going to actually take us through the app and present it to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. So this is the first page of our app. We have provided a video with Trevor Carroll, the CEO of Disability Justice Australia, to welcome the users into the app. He is well loved in the community, and it's a way to build trust and help people to understand what they're about to go through. Here's Trevor. We've also provided audio functions. This is because we want the app to be accessible from the start before people then narrow the functionality that they need themselves. We've also highlighted the 3 main functions that the app has, which is to educate people, listen to them, and empower them. So, let's go. It's just a quick disclaimer to say that it doesn't provide legal advice or create a lawyer-client relationship. And then we go into functionality.
So although it doesn't look like much, this is probably the most important part of the app and the most difficult to implement. Based on the choices that a user makes here will determine how they interact with the app. So let's take, for example, our user case of Jane. She has a vision impairment and an intellectual disability, so she may choose Easy English and also We Read to You. So here we have a video of what disability discrimination is and what it involves. This video is actually, there's 2 versions of this, one for Easy English and one for Standard English. And again, we have audio in the top right. So here we have examples of discrimination, places which disability discrimination can happen. And as Jane has selected Easy English, we've presented this as concisely as possible with images. And we also have the Standard English version, which Cami will go through now.
So in the Standard English version, we provide a lot more legal content about examples of how discrimination happens in these various locations. This is very connected to the way it is set out in the legislation. And you can find examples of where things happen here as well. And we've used real-life examples communicated to us by our client DJA of how discrimination has played out in the cases that they've seen. So it's very grounded in reality.
And so here we just have a quick message for the user, informing them that we're going to be collecting information from them.
Here we find out where they live and their postcode. DJA has funding to help people in a certain area. If they don't live in this area, however, they can still go through the app and get help.
So this is all just more information collecting. For the sake of time, I'll just skip to the end of the app. So we collect contact information, information about their disability, and information about the disability discrimination incident. So all of these have corresponded to Jane's user case and the Disability Justice Australia intake form. So this, sorry guys. So this is the end of the app. Once the app is finished, it pre-fills the DJA intake form, an Australian Human Rights Commission complaint form, and an Equal Opportunity and Victorian Human Rights Commission complaint form. It will also send an email if the user doesn't qualify for advocacy for DJA, so that they can then refer them on to someone else. And I'll just quickly show you guys an example of the email. So here it is, and then down here we have the forms pre-filled. You can also upload documents such as like evidence of the discrimination and things like that and have them sent to DJA as well. So the aim of our app was to increase access to justice for disability discrimination, and we've achieved that by customising the way the information is presented to the user and also making the process a little bit quicker and easier for DJA. Thank you for your time and attention, and we'll take questions.
Anyone
Well, just about that email, is that also in Easy English? Is that available? How does that work? If
This email is sent to DJA.
Right, I see.
It contains like preliminary information
Right.
about the user, like
Okay.
the contact details and stuff.
Yep.
It does actually inform the DJA whether or not the user has selected Easy English.
see.
Because
Yep.
if they select Easy English, we don't ask them as many questions so as not to intimidate them away from the app.
Okay.
So yeah, it is customised in that regard.
Yeah. Okay.
Bill.
Does it send a copy of what it sends to the DJA to the user?
Yes.
No,
That's
it
what it's meant
doesn't
to do.
send them a copy of their complaint forms. We discussed that with the DJA, and they don't want the user to be, like unknowingly making the process more difficult for them. Like DJA are the ones who understand the complaint process, and they're the ones who should be doing it. So when the app's finished, the user's basically told, thank you for using our app, your information has been sent to DJA, they'll contact you within 5 business days.
If I were doing this without using your app, would I do it on paper?
Yeah, so you basically
So I'd have a
download
copy then.
the complaint form, sorry?
I'd have a copy then, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to the Human Rights Commission web pages and get complaint form copies from them, yeah.
But it sounds like your client was saying to you that they didn't want to confuse the user by thinking it was their job to file the form,
Yeah,
for example.
exactly.
That was the brief you
The
got?
main
basically.
purpose of this app is it determines whether or not they're eligible for advocacy from the DJA, and then it's in the DJA's hands what they want, how they want to continue.
And how do you think you struggled with the balance between the educative function of the user having some understanding of discrimination and the triage function for DJA?
Balancing it, basically the app runs through, first it educates and it gives all the information for the user to make a determination on whether they think the discrimination happened to you. If they select that they think it has, then we say, okay, tell us what happened and give us your information so that we can contact you or you can contact us. So I think, yes, of course.
Thanks, Harry. Just to build on that as well, I think having real-world examples that were based on what we had learned from our conversations with the DJA meant that people using the app might be more inclined to see a situation and recognise their situation in that. So obviously there is that educative element, but it's also about demonstrating that we understand.
And that's what I'm probing, I guess. The educative element is particularly complex, I imagine, in this space. And so what you're doing is asking it to be a sort of recognition and refraction or a mirroring exercise.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
part of the reason why we included the videos, which have examples as well, is to make sure that we're really trying to communicate it in a variety of ways, so hopefully one of them sticks.
Can I just ask one follow-up question? If I go through this process and it tells me that I haven't experienced discrimination, now that could have been because I didn't complete the form in the way in which accurately reflected my circumstances. Is there a scoop up or...?
There is.
So can you talk to me about that for a minute?
So if you select, I don't think disability discrimination happened to me, it goes to a page where it says, even though you have selected that you think disability discrimination did not happen to you, it may be that we need more information or you need more information. Please give us your details and we can contact you. And if not, here are our details, because there's a reason why they've gotten to the site in the first place. So, yeah, we still do have that catch-all.
But the app itself doesn't deliver a judgment, a verdict on whether it thinks discrimination.
No,
It
it's
might have been
too
Pip's question. It doesn't
fact-specific.
give you a sense of whether this will go further. It simply is a referral thing. Is that right?
Yes, it's too fact-specific. We just ask the user to make a determination on whether they think, based
Sure.
on the information we've given, and then it becomes a conversation between DJA and the user.
Was there a need in the educative aspect of the app to think about jurisdictional differences, about what might be discrimination in one state or territory or the other, or did you form a view that your descriptions were general enough, they covered the field?
Yes, the descriptions were general enough to cover the field. We did work with the legislation, both federal, the Disability Discrimination Act and the Equal Opportunity Act in Victoria, and we found the common ground and, made it information given in that form.
Sure.
I had a question also about the personal information that you were collecting. There seemed to be quite a lot of it.
Yes.
It's always a challenge. I know in this area, trying to get the information that the service provider needs to make the decision about whether they can help and how. But there's also a discouraging effect on the user when there's lots and lots and lots of screens they have to fill out. So just talk to us about how you work through that process of what information should be collected, and why, and what rationale there was for the user for why that was being collected.
Yes, so that was determined at our meetings with our client, DJA, and we went through the intake form and discussed what is really necessary for you to have to be able to make contact with the user and help them. So that's how we nutted down the questions. There's actually a lot more on the intake form, and we've also provided a message to the user that says you can skip any if it's too overwhelming or you just don't know. We went quite quickly through that part, but yeah.
Have you had the opportunity, and I guess this is my question about the course generally, but have you had the chance to show this finished product to your client and get their feedback?
Yes, we were with them 2 days ago.
What surprised you about that feedback? Was there anything there that was sorry, of course.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome. You're a video star, I've seen. What, if anything, surprised you about that feedback? What did you expect or not expect? Was there anything unusual that came out of that?
We have learnt so much about how to communicate with people with a disability. Even just an assumption like, why do we have to provide Auslan if you can still read? Because you're not visually impaired. And then we learnt because not everybody who can read understands it, and a lot of people get left behind in the education system. And so if they speak the language of Auslan, we are providing that to them in their language, and that's really important. So, yeah, we've learnt a lot from working with the client.
Sorry, just to jump in, Camille, too. And I think that's why we were so adamant on having exactly the same information being provided in so many forms. So, as we saw on the first screen, you have easy English, standard English. No matter what type of English you pick, you can have someone speak to you, and then there's Auslan as well. So really, I think collective as a team, we've basically built the same app 4 times over to really make sure that we're accessing as many users as possible.
It's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. You've set an exceptionally high bar for the rest of the team. So that was a really excellent app. Thank you.
Wow. That's a pretty good panel of judges too, hey? There's some questions there. You've got yours done now. So now the next group is the group that developed the Safe Families app for Fitzroy Legal Service.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Henry. With me tonight is Adriano Carnival, Russell Hughes, and Alex Gin. We're really excited to introduce you to our Safe Families app, which we have developed with Fitzroy Legal Service. Before we begin, I would like to offer a warning to everyone here tonight and watching at home that we will be discussing issues of family violence, including sexual assault. So if at any time anyone is feeling uncomfortable or upset, you're more than welcome to step outside at any time. Fitzroy Legal Service provides legal advice for primarily disadvantaged and vulnerable clients. Their clients include recent migrants and refugees, people struggling with alcohol and drug use, and survivors of family violence. Clients experiencing family violence are particularly vulnerable and often do not have equal access to the law. Because of this, Fitzroy Legal Service wanted us to create an accessible family violence app with 3 main aims: educating the users about what behaviours can constitute family violence, determine the user's eligibility for a family violence intervention order, and connect the users with relevant support services. Clients who are experiencing family violence often also have a number of underlying issues in their life, such as mental health issues or limited literacy. Through our user testing with real clients, we were able to make sure that our app responded to these needs through a holistic approach. In order to take you through our app, we want to tell you about a fictional client story. Meet Tumi. Tumi is a mother of 2 young children. Her family moved to Australia from Tunisia 5 years ago. Over the years, her husband has become very aggressive, and she's decided she wants to know what help is available to make sure herself and her family are safe. To take you through Tumi's story and her use of the Safe Families app, I'll hand you over to Adriano.
So when you load up the app, this is the opening page that Toomey would see, so it's just a welcoming page. At the bottom of all of our screens is the Safe Steps phone number. So Safe Steps is a resource, it's a phone line that can be used 24/7 if you're experiencing domestic violence. So then what we have is our disclaimer screen, which we found in user testing no one read, except for the first line, which is probably not that shocking. So what we did is we made a secondary screen which emphasised the key points. So in user testing we found that it was quite distressing to answer certain questions, so we wanted to point out to them that this app might make them feel upset, and if they do at any time, what they can click is the quick exit button, and it will take them to just the ABC website. This is also useful if the person causing them harm leaves, walks into the room, they can quickly exit the app and it's safer for them.
Yeah.
At the top, we've also got a progress bar so that they can keep track of how they're going through the app and sort of estimate how long it's going to take them to complete it. So this screen is looking at trying to get some details about the user, just so that we can tailor the questions that they see later on in the app, as well as the resources that are presented to them. So Toomey is from Tunisia, she speaks Arabic, she was born in another country, and there's also children involved, so she clicks those options. Next we come up to who's causing her the harm, and it's her husband, so she clicks that option. Then we look at the financial abuse questions. So her husband has control of the money. We've tried to use images throughout the app for people who come from non-English speaking backgrounds to try and help convey the meaning, just so it's a bit easier for them. Then what we come to is the property damage or property abuse. Toomey's documents, her immigration documents, have been destroyed by her husband, so she ticks that option there. Then we come to the social abuse. So Toomey has some issues with her husband tracking her whereabouts, so she clicks that option. And then there's also a few other questions around that. The next thing we did is we found in user testing that users found the emotional, physical and sexual abuse questions quite distressing. So what we wanted to do was include a warning beforehand just to flag that. In this case, Toomey's all right to talk about the emotional abuse. She's found that her husband was bullying and criticising her decisions. And then we come to the tailored questions to Toomey. So there's a question about threatening to cause harm to the kids. In this case, her husband suggested that the children would suffer if she left him. And then we've also got the question about visa cancellation. So her husband threatened that she would have to return to her home country if she left him. So those questions only appear for someone who ticks those previous options in the personal identity questions. When it comes to physical abuse, Toomey doesn't feel comfortable talking about it, so she says, I can't talk about it right now, but the app asks her if she'd like to receive support about physical abuse. So she received the Safe Steps phone number, and then also in the report stage, she'll also receive the resources that are related to physical abuse. Then we come to the sexual abuse section. She isn't quite sure if she's suffering from sexual abuse, so she clicks continue. Then she realises from the information bubble that even being forced to have sex with your husband does constitute sexual abuse. We found that Fitzroy Legal Service wanted us to have an educative capacity in the app, so it was really important that all users went through the whole app and saw all the questions to realise what constituted domestic violence. And in this case, he also kisses her when she doesn't want him to. And then what we come is to the additional support section. So here, it's not, we don't ask whether or not they're suffering from these sort of, from any drug or alcohol issues. We simply ask if they'd like support. So Toomey's husband has a drug problem she would like to receive support on, and her mental health is also struggling. And this will tailor the resources that are provided to her in the report stage. So that's the questions. Now I'll hand over to Russell to speak about the report that gets generated after answering the questions.
Okay, so following the fundamental principles of the user-based design that Gary mentioned earlier, we conducted as many sessions of user feedback as we possibly could. We found that they were extremely helpful. As you may know, it's estimated that 48% of Australians are not literate enough to handle the day-to-day tasks that are expected for someone who is a member of our society. for example, reading medicine bottles or following a recipe. But that statistic is for all Australians, so you can understand how amplified that is for the clients that we're talking about here, migrants, people who don't speak English as their first language. Now, the report has to achieve the goals set out in our brief. Now, for Tumi, firstly, that means tailored legal information regarding family violence that she may be suffering, referrals to relevant support services and general background education about legal options and implications of an intervention order. But it has to be done in a way that is as simple as possible to read. Now, it's broken down into 3 sections. The first section is a quick explanation about why Tumi in this case is experiencing family violence. So it's based on the questions that are answered by Tumi, and it gives an explanation for each of the relevant types of abuse. The second section prioritizes the resources that are relevant to Tumi's experience. And you can see here the first one is In Touch, which provides services for people who may struggle with English as their first language or with cultural differences. The third is an explanation and an assessment of whether that Tumi might be eligible for a family violence intervention order. Now, we actually found that initially we thought that we would like to have the family violence intervention order higher up in the queue, but it turned out that there's such a chronic lack of information for the users that they wanted to have as much information about resources and other surrounding things in the report as possible, and that if they could be referred to the resources before the legal talk about the family violence intervention order, that was preferred. We also thought that we could segment the report into expandable click sections, but that was really difficult, and it only added confusion. So I'll hand on to Alex.
Okay, I will introduce briefly about our technical features. So first thing we introduce is our app. We understand that people may not have the access to relevant services, so we are putting stuff in our report. For example, we're providing phone number and locations in our app, and next to our services, we also provided a map for everyone to see to navigate their way. And second is our app understand that individuals may not have good English skills, so we have designed the Chinese version for those people who doesn't have good English skill but could speak better Chinese. And we also try to use simple language. We also take into account of cultural differences in our questions. And third feature is we also build a data storage in our app to store data entry by our clients anonymously. This function serves to collect people's preferences, and we will be able to further develop our app in the future based on their responses. So I want to thank Fitzroy Legal Service for giving us all the necessary help, and we want to thank everyone for coming to this event tonight. And we can take questions from now.
I've got one. Now, can I just find a bit more? I really loved the idea that if someone walked into the room and I was in the middle of completing this, I could be taken to the ABC site. I understand that. But what happens to the data entry that I've put in so far? And I think that's what you were addressing towards the end there. So where is that stored on my computer, and how vulnerable am I to somebody who's looking at my history?
So this is an issue we did discuss with Fitzroy Legal Service.
Yeah.
So our application would be embedded in their site. So it would be accessible through their site, which is really up to the user to get to that site to kind of open it in an incognito browser. We have spoken to them about potential capabilities later for their website, but as it stands, because this will be embedded in their website, it's determined by the history in that comes up from Fitzroy Legal Service.
So quickly to follow up, I can go to the FLS site and find my doc and finish it, because I might not finish the questions.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it doesn't record any documentation or anything. So the app, the user fills it out completely anonymous. So really, it is a tailored report at the end for their circumstances, but it's not something you can go back and complete again. The end, once you get to the end and you do have that report though, there is the capability that you can put in your email address and have that emailed to you, so you do have a copy of that report.
Just on that, in terms of the data storage, we only record the session once they come to the report stage. So we don't collect any data in the leading up questions. It only gets pushed to the server at the conclusion of the app.
And if the user does choose to send an email to themselves, there's a little warning bubble that pops up to remind them to make sure that it's an email address that won't be intercepted by a potential partner or...
Yep.
Did you think of that, putting that guidance right at the start? The idea about incognito browsers and so on. Did that feature, or did you think that was too confusing, or how did you grapple with that, or is that at the start?
Well, we tried to think about that option, but the only concern was there's so many different browsers out there.
Sure.
It'd be quite confusing to explain how to do it in all browsers,
Yeah.
as well as this is probably going to be used mostly on mobile phones, and that's
Sure.
a whole different kettle of fish to work out how you
Fair
can lead
enough.
people concisely to open it up in a incognito mode.
I think the main safety mechanism in terms of that is to somewhat obfuscate the name of the actual website. So if it's Fitzroy Legal Service, you obviously don't want it to be Safe Homes or Family Violence
Sure.
/ yada yada yada, but rather something that is just a generic word that won't show up in the history as something that might be true.
And did you think about, or did your client ask whether this form or forum could give somebody an immediate outreach to an emergency services type response? Was that something that they were discouraging or thoughtful of, or thought might confuse what this was about? I can imagine somebody might conceivably Google domestic violence help, and they arrive at this website, and what they might need is an immediate assistance. Did you think that through, or does that pollute what it is Fitzroy Legal Services is trying to do?
No, they were definitely very mindful of that. There are 2 references at the very beginning.
Great.
To ensure that it's clear if you need immediate help.
Yes.
To call the police.
I see. Right.
And also just along.
I can see you put the number down the
every
bottom.
page
Yeah, I
there's
see.
There's
Great.
safe steps, and they'll refer them as well.
Perfect.
The other thing is also with some forms of abuse, if they click yes to suffering from that, they get an immediate prompt, in particular for physical abuse.
Yeah.
If you're ever in a position of danger, call 000.
I see.
And then for sexual abuse, there's also we reiterate the safe steps mobile phone line.
Gotcha. Very thoughtful. Thanks.
So I liked the Chinese version as well. I noticed at the beginning people could select the language that they spoke. So to me, I think was Arabic. So what does that actually mean in terms of her experience?
So
What's different?
So that question was, we linked that to the data storage. So the purpose of that was we wanted to track who was using the app, right? So we would be able to get a list of all the languages that were preferred, and that would allow Fitzroy Legal Service in the future to prioritise certain languages, just because it is quite costly to translate everything. So we put that in for them, so that in the future, if they wanted to expand it, they were able to target. So they had some opinion about, they thought Arabic was used by a lot by their users, as well as Vietnamese, but this will be able to allow them to confirm that that is the case.
So the report that Toomey gets is it's in English and it doesn't have any Arabic resources.
Currently, yeah, we only offer English and Mandarin. Yep.
Who did you do the user testing with? You worked with Fitzroy. Was it with their clients as well? Yeah.
So
Yeah,
the
great.
clients that we were lucky to work with, they had already gone through the entire process. So it was really about talking to them to see if they thought this was useful, what they would have wanted to know at the start, and it was really positive feedback. Like, it was amazing how it shaped this app. So yeah.
I'm going to steal Steve's question from before about anything surprise you when you went through that process?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was like when we first started, like our first session of user testing, both us and Fitzroy Legal Service probably weren't as focused on the external resources. Speaking to the users, that's the primary thing that they wanted. It wasn't kind of, I guess, that educative element. It wasn't the links to the Family Violence Intervention Order. It was those external resources like Safe Steps, Domestic Violence Victoria, those ones that are going to really help them like start getting out of that situation.
Can I just ask quickly, do you imagine your user is sitting at home doing this, or is in the public library, or is in the FLS office? Where was Toomey in your imagination?
So we did talk about this, and we have talked about this with Fitzroy Legal Service as well. So obviously some users, their internet usage won't be safe, so they won't be able to use their phones, they won't be able to use their computers. There are computers at the Fitzroy Town Hall Library. We've also spoken to them about potentially having computers available at the Neighbourhood Justice Centre, where people could come in, see if they are eligible, and then they're right there to speak to people if the report does come back and it says, yes, you may be eligible for a family violence intervention order.
One of the other aspects was we were hoping that over time it might get rolled out to social workers, as well as they get a lot of referrals from police who tell them to go and get a family violence intervention order. But for Fitzroy, that was a concern because for a lot of people, that's not probably the best option for them. So if we could get those users to get informed earlier on in the process, instead of going to court for a family violence intervention order and then being directed to other resources, we were hoping that this could speed up that process.
Once it gets referred to police, or police come to a family violence scene, effectively it's out of the hands of the people, and the police can issue notices and intervention orders without the consent of the people who are being harmed. So yeah, there was a real focus from Fitzroy on getting some understanding before it comes to that in the people.
I think that exhausts our questions. Thank you all so much. Brilliant presentation.
You go first next time.
All right. The next group is the Monday Night Service Client Intake app, developed for Moonee Valley Legal Service, and thank you very much for the questions. We might need to probably make them a little bit shorter if we're going to keep somewhere near the time we're here.
Ring a bell when you want to say
it. But they're fabulous questions, so I really don't want to stop you, but if we're happy to be here all night, I'm very happy to be here all night.
That was very articulate. What should we be aiming for, Gary?
About 3 minutes rather than 10.
3 minutes for questions?
3 or 4 minutes rather than 10, but and see how you go.
Gary, for the...
It's not like often that I tell the Dean to just quieten down a little bit, but, I might as well do it publicly.
That's right.
Okay.
Just for those presenting, if you want to step away from the lectern, there's a microphone here as well, so it's entirely up to you.
Oh dear.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Waring, and these are my colleagues, Phoebe Lynn, Lauren Flint, and Eunice Ginter. We've had the pleasure of working with Brendan Lakota to produce an app for the night service at Moonee Valley Legal Service, or MVLS as we'll call it for short. MVLS is an independent, community-managed, not-for-profit community legal centre in Ascot Vale. MVLS provides free legal advice to anyone who lives, works or studies in Moonee Valley. It provides generalist legal services with a focus on infringements, consumer law, criminal law, family law and family violence. The majority of MVLS's clients speak English and are residents of public housing or recent migrants. On Monday nights, MVLS holds a night service which is staffed primarily by volunteers. MVLS requested an app to streamline their intake for their night service, and that the app replicate and replace their two-stage intake process, asking the same questions. So first, MVLS interviews clients for basic information necessary to run a conflict check. on their client database, which is a separate standalone platform to Neota. Clients then wait while MBLS runs a conflict check. If there is no conflict and they are eligible for assistance, MBLS then asks clients to fill out more detailed information in a second form. So this app, which features MBLS's colour theme, as you'll see in a moment, streamlines the intake for MBLS's night service, which is currently a laborious paper-based process requiring multiple touch points across 2 forms and then entry into MBLS's client database. This app allows clients to directly input their details on their own smartphones and on iPads provided by MBLS, rather than having to wait for a volunteer to interview them individually at each stage, which is, as I said before, a very laborious process. This app has 2 steps, which we will take you through now. And now speaking is Phoebe.
Thanks, Sarah. So, this is the front page of our app. So this evening we'll be running through the app as a hypothetical client, also called Jane, but this will be Jane Smith. And she has an employment problem. So first we'll take you through step 1, finding Jane eligible, after which a volunteer would run a conflict check based on the information provided. And then assuming there is no conflict, Jane will proceed to step 2 as instructed by the app, which will then take her through to the end of the intake process. So when Jane first arrives at MBLS, she'll be given a card with a number on it, and it'll also have a link to this app, which she can type into her phone or a shared device. And the number denotes the order in which she arrived and will be seen. So as Sarah mentioned, MBLS wanted us to replicate their 2-stage intake process. So we have divided our app into step 1 and step 2. And we try to avoid confusion over this on the home screen by having the buttons one after another, separated by a line break, and also providing some pop-up information on what each step involves. And we have tried to use simple plain English in this app where possible. So Jane, when she begins, she'll click on this button, and then she'll be presented with this disclaimer, which she'll have to accept to continue. And then Jane is asked some basic questions, such as the number she was allocated, her name, birth date, and also whether she's here for her own legal problem. If Jane is here on behalf of a friend or family member, unfortunately MBLS cannot help and should be directed out of the app. Jane is then asked about what area of law her problem falls into, and these areas of law are all serviced by MBLS. And we appreciate that some of these categories may not be so obvious to the average person, so we have provided some pop-up text on the ones we believe to be a bit less clear. And if Jane's problem doesn't fall into any of these categories, she will select none of the above. But here her problem type is employment, so we'll click next. And Eunice will take you through the rest of step 1.
Jane is then asked whether she has been to Moonee Valley Legal Service before, and we'll assume that she has been, but for another issue more than 12 months ago. She is then asked whether she knows who else is involved in her problem. We'll assume that she does, and we'll pretend that the other party is a company, calls as it is an employment issue. There is no other person or company involved, so we click no. This is the report for step 1. At the top of the report, Jane is instructed that her responses have been emailed to the volunteers for them to perform a conflict check. She will be asked to wait while this is performed and not proceed to step 2 until she is told to do so by a volunteer. The report also includes her answers so that she can check whether they are correct. For the purposes of this evening, we will assume that the conflict check was performed successfully and that Moonee Valley Legal Service can assist her. So the volunteer would tell her to go back to the home screen and begin step 2. Jane would be able to do this by either clicking here at the bottom of the page or pressing the home button at the top of the page. Unfortunately, we had to break the app into 2 parts to allow the volunteer to run the conflict check. The Neota platform would not allow us to continue straight through the app because a report needs to be generated at the end of step 1, which brings the app to a conclusion. Additionally, because some clients would be using a shared device, it would not be practical for the app to continue straight through from step 1 to step 2. Now Lauren will be guiding you through step 2.
So Jane would click on next, click here for step 2. Sorry. And then she'll see another disclaimer that she needs to accept, and this just replicates the one in step 1. So she'd click I understand and continue. Then she'll be asked if she's been told to start step 2. We don't want clients starting step 2 unless they've been told to, so she'll have to confirm yes, and if not, she'll be told to see a volunteer. She'll then re-enter the number that she got when she arrived and provide a brief description of her legal problem. She'll then be asked for some more contact details, including her mobile number and email address, and if she has a home address to provide it. She's then asked about her gender, her heritage, and whether she has any disabilities, and these are all this is all information that Moonee Valley requires in their second stage of the intake process. She's then asked about her relationship status and her family type and whether she has any dependents. And then about how well she speaks English and whether or not she'll require an interpreter going forward. Then she's asked about her income and where it comes from, whether she's employed and how much she earns in a week, and again, where that comes from. Then she's asked for the purposes of Moonee Valley where she found out about the service. Here we've said that she's referred from Victoria Legal Aid. She's then asked to read and accept the client agreement policy, which is exactly the same as is normally included in their intake procedure, but normally it's just a paper form, and we've just replicated that and been asked to put it into the app, and then she'll accept yes or no at the bottom. She's then presented with this report that will be emailed to the volunteer, so it's really for their purposes. It will be included in the email as a PDF attachment, and it will be printed out and inserted into the file for the lawyer to have when Jane's interviewed later in the evening. And that is the end of our app.
Thanks very much. My only question was, what would the harm be, from your client's point of view, about starting the Form 2 while they were waiting for the conflict position? Was there some particular reason they said we can't have that information on our system until we can confirm they can be a client, or was there a reason why we had to sit and do nothing for a little period?
That was part of the reason, because they would have to do something with the information because they've got their personal details, and they would have to either tell the client that they were going to destroy that information or store it in some way. And I think it was also just to prevent false hope of, them thinking that, yep, I can be helped here and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that was the reason. Yep.
Can I just ask very quickly, the client nominates the area that their problem's in, and I can think of numerous examples where a client might get that wrong. What's the consequence of getting that wrong?
So if they decide that it's none of the above and they're wrong, it will still be, they'll receive a report that says, we can't help you, here's someone who can, but it will also be emailed to the volunteer as well, and they'll be asked to check with the volunteer that the information is correct. And if the volunteer, the volunteer will say, what problem are you having? And they say this, and if it's something they can't help with, the volunteer will then reiterate the information about where they can go to seek help. And if the volunteer thinks, oh, you've made a mistake, it's actually an employment issue, for example, please go back, we can help you select employment and then go through the process.
There's a part in that step that has a spot for them to input their description briefly of what their problem is, if it's none of the eligible or ineligible categories.
So at the beginning of step 2, you said that there was a place where you could enter the number that you were given in step 1. So what happens if you make a mistake and type a different number? Do you get to see someone else's information? Is that a privacy concern?
No, that's just for the purposes of Moonee Valley. It's purely about the order that they arrive in, and that translates to the order that they'll be seen in. So if they figure out the system and put number 1 when they're actually 8, then there might be 2 number 1s, but that's the extent of it.
So if the device that the user is using can be shared amongst multiple people, what if multiple people have gone through step 1? How does step 2 know which information to recall?
That's the problem. It doesn't repopulate from step 1. That was one of the problems we encountered just with the Neota software, because to get to the end of step 1, a report is generated, which brings that to a conclusion. So it doesn't actually store any information from step 1. Luckily, the only 2 questions that are replicated is their number and their name and date of birth. But yeah, there's nothing stored between stages.
All right.
I'm
sorry.
Oh, no, go on.
And I have one more question. So
Sure.
the big legal agreement at the end, is there a simple English option for that?
Not currently.
Not currently.
It was written by lawyers first.
Yeah, that's something that they have to go through. We appreciate, like, most people probably won't read it, but that's the system as it stands, and they're the words that they need to accept. So
Yeah. So my question's kind of a follow-up to Bill's. How constrained were you by the Moonee Valley process itself? I mean, I know Brendan's here, so maybe you don't want to be too critical of it, but the brief was obviously to design something for MVLS. So just talk a little bit about how the discussions you had with the service.
yeah, they wanted us to replicate the questions. They wanted all of those questions to be asked. Those are what they need for their system and for their lawyers to have an idea about not just the legal problem, but the person's background and those sorts of things. They initially wanted it in the same order as that they input into their database, but we sort of decided that it would be, some questions were better asked together rather than in the order that they had them on their forms, and so that's one thing that we changed, but we didn't really have too much freedom with what the questions were that we asked and changing those, because it's for their
So your user is the legal service?
Pretty much, yeah.
But there were some things that we were able to do with it. So when we went and visited Moonee Valley Legal Service, through our interaction with clients and with Brendan, we realised that there's an additional question we could ask, which is whether or not they're there for their own question, because we actually encountered that problem that day. So that was something we were able to integrate into. And ideally what we had hoped to do with the app is for it to be able to connect to MVLS's database and run that conflict check and then continue through. But that's technologically not possible right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you. The next group is the app Housing for the Aged Online Assistant, developed for the Housing for the Aged Action Group.
Good evening, my name is Liam. We are here to present our app for Housing for the Aged Action Group, which assists those over 55 experiencing tenancy and housing issues in finding advocacy, assistance and to clarify their rights under the Residential Tenancy Act or the Retirement Villages Act. This area of law is very complicated and it is often unclear which of the 2 acts the tenants may fall under, what type of tenancy they may hold and what rights they have. Moreover, there are very few resources available to assist older tenants to navigate these issues. And it is difficult for Housing for the Aged Action Group to ask the right questions of clients, as the area of the law can be quite circular, making it hard to triage the clients into their respective groups. Bainey will now talk more about the app that we have built and the benefit it provides to both Housing for the Aged Action Group and their potential client base.
Our app, Housing for the Aged Online Assistant, will act as a first point of call and can easily direct users who are not eligible for Housing for the Aged Action Group services to assistance elsewhere. This ensures that retirement village workers are able to dedicate more time to those who are eligible for its services. The app then asks a series of questions to narrow down the specific issues that the user is experiencing and then provides some preliminary information as to what type of tenancy they hold and the rights that attach to it. The result of the app's questions are also provided to Housing for the Aged Action Group, who can then follow up with a phone call or a meeting to provide further information. An important benefit of the application is that it allows users to access information in an anonymous manner. This is important in situations where older people are facing situations where their independence may be being interfered with, which means that making a phone call or coming for an in-person consultation is rather difficult. Given that we were working with older users, our app had to be simple enough that it could be navigated with a basic level of computer literacy. One specific feature that user testing indicated that was of the utmost importance was the inclusion of a callback button in case the app or the problem became too confusing for the user. This allows the user to exit the app after giving the phone number in favour of being called by a worker from Housing for the Aged Action Group. Daniel will now go through the app and demonstrate some of its functionalities, most of which we have developed based on feedback we have received from user testing.
Norm is 60 years old and lives at Sunny Parks Retirement Homes. He thought he owned his property, but he has just received a notice of eviction. When Norm complained to Sunny Parks, they told him that as part of his contract, they have the right to evict within a certain time period. Luckily, Norm's friend knows that Housing for the Aged Action Group can assist him and suggests he looks online. Norm doesn't spend a lot of time on the computer, but manages to find Housing for the Aged Action Group's website and has spotted the online assistant on the website's front page. After beginning the session, Norm will agree to a disclaimer. As you can see from the progress bar located on the top of the page, Housing for the Aged Online Assistant has 3 stages. First, eligibility and contact information. Second, narrowing down the problem. And third, identifying any tenancy rates. Norm is presented with a basic information form where he can put in details such as his name, whether he is over 55 and located in Victoria, which is essential for Norm to be eligible for Housing for the Aged Action Group services. If Norm is not over 55 and is not a Victorian resident, he will be referred to appropriate service providers such as Consumer Affairs Victoria. Norm is able to remain anonymous if he wishes, as noted previously. As Housing for the Aged Action Group only deals with current housing issues, if Norm was looking to find housing, he would be directed to an appropriate service provider. That would be if he clicked the Finding Housing button. But in this case, Norm has a problem with housing. And the problem is that Norm has been given a notice of eviction under his tenancy contract. As you can see, he has quickly selected the relevant options to inform Housing for the Aged Action Group of his problem. If none of the options suited Norm's situation, he has the ability to click Other and will be able to type in a personalised response. Norm now has to describe his housing type, which he struggles with given the level of complexity that is actually involved with the seemingly simple task of defining the type of tenancy. He is able to click on some of the options in order to read a definition, which helps him in selecting the options that he feels best describe Sunny Parks Retirement Homes, although he is still not entirely sure. Bridget will now go through stage 3 of the online assistant, identifying norms, tenancy type, and rights.
So this page asks a series of questions relating to the way in which Norm has described his housing situation. If he had said his housing could best be described as public housing or a caravan park, he would have been directed to another page with referral links or a different set of questions. Here the questions are relevant to a residential park or village. Finally, Norm is presented with a report which suggests that he's likely a resident in a retirement village and presents him with some preliminary information. A report of Norm's inputs is also sent to Housing for the Aged Action Group, and they are immediately better informed to follow up with Norm and further assist him with the email address he has provided. Liam will talk about the callback button.
So you'll notice that on each of our pages we have included a callback button at the bottom of the page in the event that the user is unsure about and wishes to receive a callback from Housing for the Aged Action Group. The feedback we received from user testing was that although the app was quite functional and easy to navigate, they felt reassured that there was an option of receiving a callback at any stage of using the app. This also prevents users from dropping out of the app during the stages if they feel that they have faced any difficulty. Housing for the Aged Action Group requested the feature as some impersonal follow-up remains necessary given the complexity of the issues that users face. Keeping user-based design thinking in mind, we also implemented large text and buttons in our user interface and a more conversational tone of language in response to user suggestions. Our test users were able to assist in the phrasing of some sample questions, which was very helpful in allowing us to write questions using an appropriate and accessible tone of voice, ultimately creating a better user experience. We'd like to thank Housing for the Aged Action Group, especially Fiona York, Shane McGrath and Fiona Waters. Many thanks also to Gary, Kenji and Jesse, and to Herbert Smith Freehills, Neota Logic and Melbourne Law School for bringing us the subject and tonight's event.
So, what's the output for the user? What do they receive? Just that last page. What's the thing that they receive at the end of it? It seems it's a referral output. Is that right? And,
sure.
And do they receive a concluded view as to whether they're subject to one act or the other? Does it give them that sense?
So we see it as a referral app. So
sorry, going back on these things is the hardest thing in the world. So feel free. So it's principally a referral app, is that right?
It's principally a referral app, but we see also the information is then sent to Housing for the Aged Action Group.
Yep.
So the user can be presented with a preliminary, almost a definition of what sort of rights they might have. They are able to give, able to have referral links.
Right.
And then upon meeting Housing for the Aged Action Group, all that information that they've already input into the app is presented. It just sort of streamlines that service.
I understand.
In being able to advocate for themselves as well.
It can also be used internally by the Housing for the Aged Action Group. They're, like, for instance, volunteers who might be unfamiliar with the quite complex legal questions. So it can help the volunteers ask clients appropriate questions to determine which act applies.
Sure. We seem to have broken the internet behind you as well. Don't worry, I'm sure we can fix that. I'll get someone to look at that, but keep asking.
Yep. So can I just quickly, it seems that the primary motivation is information triage. Is there a data analytics component here that HAAG is trying to collect data, and how are we servicing that if that's part of it?
So the data is being collected and will be sent through to Housing for the Aged Action Group at the completion of the app, regardless of whether the user then chooses to be contacted or not.
Yeah. Thanks.
So I have a question. Maybe I missed something early on. Was at the end it says that after collecting all the information, someone will give you a call. Where is it that you input your phone number?
Oh, so on the first screen, we might have actually missed that. There is a question that asks, would you like to be contacted by a worker? And then if you click yes to that, it comes up with an input to put in your contact details or an email address.
I see, okay.
And so then they were able to follow up that way. Or else if they've gone through the callback button as well. Yeah.
You can put it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just thinking about your scenario of your hypothetical user, they've received a frightening letter that's been telling them they're about to be evicted. And did your client think it was appropriate at the end of this app to say, for example, don't reply to the letter until we've been in contact, or you don't need to reply? Was there any need in those sorts of circumstances where someone's ticked the I'm about to be evicted button, as they did on your form? Was there anything that could be packaged up as a sort of a brief message back, or was that seen as too bespoke advice?
I think because situations like this could be quite fact-specific,
Sure,
because it's hard to categorise exactly what tenancy the user has. So therefore, it's best to for HAAG to contact the client rather than give a message to the client, which might put them into more stress unnecessarily.
Sure.
How did you do the user testing? Was this with the Housing for the Aged Action Group, or was it for, I can't remember the user's name, Norm? Which user did you test it with?
We did conducted a few sessions at Housing for the Aged Action Group, so we were able to be put in contact with, there was a group of advocates who had previously gone through housing issues, so they were able to reflect on their experience and contemplate whether the app would have serviced them in that scenario. And we also conducted a further testing with potential users. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. So the next group is the Bail Helper, which was developed for Prisoners Legal Service in Queensland.
Good evening. We are the Prisoners Legal Service Bail App team. My name is Erin. This is Henry, Shaw, and Mona, and we are the proud creators of the Bail Helper. We are the first law apps team who have ever worked with an interstate community legal center. So we were sort of Gary's guinea pigs to see if working long distance with a CLC was viable. And I think thus far we've sort of made it work. Communication is key. Our point of contact for PLS was Peter Lyons. He expressed a grave need for technology to try and help with the pressing issue that is prisoners on remand in Queensland, and Australia for that matter. Currently, in Queensland, there are approximately 8,500 people in prison, and 30% of these people are in remand. For those of you who don't know the prison lingo, remand is someone who is in prison, they've been charged, but they're sitting there waiting for their case to be heard by a judge. Many of these people have tried and failed to get bail and are therefore stuck in prison for an average of nearly 3 months. So our question is, what is causing these people to fail to get bail? Believe it or not, part of it is the bail application process in and of itself. And after delving into this a little bit, we are actually not surprised. Persons in remand who are trying to apply for bail by themselves are currently met with this. 50 pages of legalese that people that are sitting in prison need to figure out all by themselves and then create court documents which they are then able to submit to the court and which will be accepted by the court. Our app intends to completely simplify and expedite this process. By creating a simple, beautiful, and user-friendly application, our aspiration is for the Bail Helper app to turn the bail application process on its head, unburden Queensland's bail system and prison system by decreasing its population thanks to successful bail applicants who have used our app and can now quickly extricate themselves from remand. Next up is Henry, and he's going to start taking you through the app.
Thanks, Erin. So the purpose of our app is to create 4 documents that ultimately will be submitted to the court as part of a prisoner's bail application. Through using our application, prisoners do not have to worry about formatting the documents to fit the court standards or how to write responses in a legal language. We ask a series of questions to the user, and from the responses, we generate properly worded and formatted court documents. Our application aims to make the bail application process easier to navigate for the prisoner, and we also minimize the amount of time bail clerks and lawyers at PLS have to spend on each application. By generating the documents through our app, bail clerks or the lawyers at PLS can focus their attention on the substantive information that is relevant in a bail application. Before we run through the application, I'll briefly just touch on how we worked on creating an engaging user experience. Firstly, because many of our users come from backgrounds with low education, we wanted to word our questions in a way that they would be able to understand. Throughout our application, we allowed users to hover over legal words or certain questions in order to have a pop-up that elaborates the question in a simpler way or explains why the answer to a possibly sensitive question, such as if they have a drug history, is relevant for their bail application. Further, we are aware that our app is quite long. This is necessary because it needs to gather a lot of information from the user to create the court documents. To make the process much more engaging, we have firstly chosen an interesting but unobtrusive background, which our client has approved of. Secondly, we included a detailed progress bar so the user knows exactly what stage they're up to. Shah will now take you through some important parts of the application.
Hi, so my name is Shah, and I'm now going to take you through the Bail Helper app. As you can see, the whole app has been streamlined to look very simple and sleek, but do not be fooled. Underneath the artistic blue exterior lies some very, very complicated logic. To start with, in the first few pages of the app, we are gathering users' personal details to input in the various forms to determine their eligibility. This sounds simple enough, but because the app generates 4 forms, in the past, groups created a different app to match with each form, whereas we have designed our app to just work out of the single platform, which makes the whole experience more user-friendly and streamlined. Moving on. Oh, shit. Sorry. So this is the charges page, which we will use to fill up in the bail application. As you can see, Jamie Oliver has committed treason. So I want you to remember the word treason over there. So, do you have any other charges made against you? He'll say yes. Please indicate all other charges made against him, and he's also committed piracy. So, the reason I asked you to remember the word treason is because on this page, were you already on bail when the following charges were made against you? This indicates that what we are referring to is that we are referring to the charge of treason. So the app actually captures that information and then poses it back in subsequent questions to make the questions even easier. Moving forward. So this is the personal information page where the user has to fill out personal details. As you can see, the progress bar has moved forward to personal information. People's living situation is an example of how we had to think through every scenario in order to ensure that the app will function for every person in remand in Queensland. For example, the person can be born in Queensland, he cannot be born in Queensland. If he picks yes, a different set of questions come out. If he picks no, this set of question comes out. He can also pick which state he was born. If he's visiting, he can click on that and a box will appear where he can explain his circumstances. So this amount of permutation and combinations actually contributed to the complexities of the app. The next few pages will discuss the address, where would he live if granted bail. So he indicated that he lived in he will be living in a rehabilitation center. Before his arrest, whether he had a place to live. So you can input his details over there. Moving on. Again, have you lived anywhere else other than the following? So this was his response in the previous page. If he says yes, then he'll be brought to this page where he can enter all his past residential addresses. There's a plus button over there, which brings up another row if he has lived in more than one address. We will also include employment details. And if he clicks next. So, were you employed anywhere else aside from the above? Again, the name's over there. In the interest of time, I would need to go through the app a little bit quicker. But again, like my colleague mentioned, the app is just very complicated and it's very long, so that's why we're taking a little bit longer than usual. So financial surety, the reason we've designed this question as it is because of how it will look in the report. So the app is incredibly complex, but the brilliance of it lies in the reports at the end, which my colleague will show you. He can also has an option to add another guarantor, and if he's done, he will click I'm done adding guarantors. So that's the surety value. That's his passport details. Again, highlighting another complexity about the app is the person might have a passport. The person might be a German citizen who's in prison in Queensland. So we have to have the option for him to list an overseas country where his passport may be located if the passport is back in Germany. He also has an option to add another passport over there. Moving on, have you ever breached bail before? Nearly there. This is where he can describe his circumstances, which will assist him in his bail application. So as you can see, he's keen to join rehab because of his heroin addiction. He has a 5-year-old daughter that he needs to take care of, so that's why he requires bail. He accepts that. And this is the transcript. This transcript allows him to look at all the questions that he's answered and his corresponding answers. If he's not happy with any of them, he can go back and change the responses, and this transcript will change. But if he's happy, he will click I'm happy. And then he'll get to send his application to either the bail clerk, prisoner's legal service, to himself, or to someone else. If he clicks 2 of this, he can actually input the email address for the application to be sent to, for the reports to be sent to, sorry. And now we will get to the report stage, which my colleague Mona will mention.
Hi everyone. Okay, so now we come to the final screen and the 4 court documents have been generated. They are present as a preview for the user just here on the screen. That's just so the user can see immediately what's been done with their answers. But importantly, these documents are available to be downloaded here as Word documents. So they can click on that, it'll download it, they can save it, they can print it, they can edit it further. And of course, these documents have also been sent to whatever email addresses they chose, so then PLS or the bail clerk can also review and edit those documents. I'll just take you through the affidavit just to demonstrate what it will look like. So as you can see, the affidavit is substantially in the form that the court rules dictate. So for example, it's got headings, paragraph numbers, a footer, and it's also got a space for signatures. Now, in our conversations with PLS, with Peter, he really emphasised the footers as something that actually causes a lot of applications to be rejected by the court. So, for example, the court rules dictate that this particular footer is to appear on sheet 1 of the affidavit, but not subsequent pages. So, by using our app, the user doesn't have to think about any of that because we've automated it. So the text in red is the user's responses. And that also includes any questions they've left blank, maybe because they didn't know or were unsure. For example, here court name and court location were left blank. The idea is that once each of these details has been confirmed and clarified, they can then change that font to black, so it's ready to go. There's also some text that is highlighted yellow, so those are just further flags of things that need to be followed up on. So for example here, this is indicating that a letter of support is required from an employer. So as you can see, our app aims to basically to prevent users from having to create these documents from scratch, which is something that can often result in low quality applications that are thrown out by the court for something as simple as a missing footer. So a process that would normally take a few hours with multiple appointments with a bail clerk can now be done in 20, 30 minutes using our app. And because the documents are generated with correct formatting already, the bail clerks and PLS can just focus on improving the substantive content, and then the court will consider it on its merits. We are incredibly proud of what we've created. We believe that the bail helper has the potential to make the bail application process more efficient, and in doing so, ease some of the burden on courts, on overcrowded prison systems, and also community legal centres such as Prisoners Legal Service. Thank you.
I guess we asked the same question we might have asked before with a similar app, although noting yours has such length to it because it's complex, and don't worry, we wrote that down. Is it possible to save your progress halfway through and return? Is that an option under Neota, or is that not an option at all?
So we've discussed this with Neota. Kenji's in the audience today.
Sure.
The problem with saving is that the user has to create an account. So that's practical if there's only 10, 20 users, but if it's for the entire prison population, we need to discuss with Neota a little bit more before that becomes, before we can actually implement that in our app. But if the app takes off and Prisoners Legal Service use it, I'm pretty sure we can always discuss with Neota to make sure that the user can generate those details for himself so that he can save it and then continue it at a later point in time.
Thanks.
This might be a little bit out of left field, but about 30 years ago I used to do bail apps for people, and one of the really tricky things was you wanted to run your app when you had the best possible prospects of success. So how do you work that through with the client here?
So if we were to go back to the second page of the opening screen, it actually indicates the list of letters he should have. Or the list of items he should have in his possession before he commenced the app. So we understand that letters from guarantors, letters from employers, letters from rehabilitation centers or like medical institutions would actually boost his chances of being granted bail. So we've already indicated that to the user. But if he doesn't have any of that, it doesn't prevent him from moving forward because the questions can be left blank, and then he can check it again with the bail clerk when it's submitted to the bail clerk.
Yeah, so effectively you've left a warning about the application being premature with the bail clerk.
So at the end, you mentioned that you could have the Word documents emailed to you, right? Was there a place where you could enter it to have it emailed to other places as well?
Yes. So at the bottom to myself, there's an option to someone else. So you can click to someone else and a follow-up question will come up where he can input someone else's email address, and he can add multiple email address because you can click the plus button on the side.
The ubiquitous plus button, awesome. Another question, so when you click the start over button that was up there, does that retain the responses when you go through the form again?
No, it doesn't retain the responses. So what you see over here is we've actually pre-filled those responses. That's why it's just moving straight ahead. But if you do click start over, you may need to input your responses again.
Okay, and what about if I get to the end of the report and I want to correct something?
You can click back.
Okay.
But you have to click back to that particular question. So you have to.
And then when I go forward again, my responses will already be there?
Yes.
For the following, okay.
Yes.
Was it possible to hyperlink? I've got this question wrong. Can I shoot straight back to category 3? Is that a? Sorry, am I in trouble with Neota again? Sorry, Dan.
As in we would. To be honest, I'm not too sure what the answer is.
Sure. For future versions.
Yeah, we did have that in mind. It will be easier to have the user click on a particular question and then bring it back to that question that he wants to alter. But for the moment, we don't actually have that in our app.
Sure.
I don't have any questions actually that were answered. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Excellent
Great.
presentation.
Thank you. Next presentation is the Visa Cancellation Guide, which was developed for the Visa Cancellations Working Group.
Just a second of prep. Give it to a moment. My name is Joy Kim, and along with my group members Nick Chan, Alexandra Cook, and Eileen Ng, we've built the Visa Cancellations Guide. We'd first like to take this opportunity to thank Hannah, our contact of the Visa Cancellations Working Group, as well as James and Joanne, who worked closely with us during the app build. The team at Neota, especially Kenji, who answered our questions at all hours of the night, and Gary and Jessie for organising and running this subject. We've all really enjoyed it. Before we run through the app, we want to give you an idea of the problem we're addressing and why the app is so important. The best way to describe the impact of the visa cancellation is to introduce you to Jane. So she first came to Australia on a holiday when she was 24. In Australia, she met Stephen and started a family. Alice is 5 and has never left Australia. The little family has made a life here. But along the way, Jane has gotten into a little bit of trouble with the law, and this has gotten her into strife with immigration. The department doesn't think she meets the character requirements to stay in Australia. Because Jane is in detention, Stephen is left with the overwhelming task of working, raising a family, and dealing with Jane's deportation. He's feeling worried and alone, and he doesn't know who to turn to. If Stephen is lucky or well-informed, at this point he can reach out and seek assistance from groups like the Visa Cancellation Working Group. But with the number of cancellations increasing rapidly in Australia, resources are strained, and people like Stephen and Jane are going through visa cancellations alone or giving up entirely. The problem begins with the Migration Act. It's inherently complex and confusing to navigate. People facing cancellation have to grapple with 8 different grounds and additional sub-grounds, 5 different notices, and 3 methods of delivery in order to determine their rights. This complicates an already stressful and intimidating process. So the working group has identified 3 key obstacles people facing cancellation struggle to overcome. Firstly, they struggle to understand their notice, which informs them of their cancellation. Secondly, they struggle to identify their next steps, their rights, and how to access them. And thirdly, they struggle to respond to their notice. They don't know when to respond, and they don't know what to put in their response. Tackling these obstacles in our app has been a challenge. To fully cover the depth of information contained in the Migration Act, our app has 40 unique user pathways, and those are just the main pathways. We collect over 120 data points, and all of that is supported by a network of complex reasoning. So the functions of our app include identifying what rights users have, for example, whether they're able to make a response or whether they'll have to go to court or the AAT. It also calculates deadlines for users. It sends an initial response to the minister before the deadline and assists users to prepare a more detailed response. And where the app can't assist a user, it directs them to resources that are relevant to their unique situation.
Before we take you through our app, I'll explain the design process we used to develop it. Given the nature of visa cancellations and the emotional strain it can put on people going through the process, conducting user testing with the ultimate user has been challenging. However, we consulted with experts who work closely with people going through visa cancellations, and they were able to give us an idea of how the user might experience the app. We've also done some testing with people who reflect the typical user's experience in some way. For instance, we learnt that reading and education levels are a barrier for many cancelees. The working group indicated that we should pitch the language of the app at reading age 10, and so we did some testing with 10-year-olds. But unfortunately, there's some concepts that 10-year-olds don't really understand that people with a reading age 10 might. And so we replicated the testing with older users. We also conducted remote testing, and the working group helped us distribute draft versions of our app and a feedback survey to the ultimate users. And we received responses about where applicants would, where cancelees would turn to for first assistance, as well as feedback on the design, usability, and language of the app. For instance, we initially had links in sand colour and bolded maroon lettering for emphasis, but the users kept trying to click the bold maroon lettering. So we changed the app so the only coloured text in the app are the links. And to make the app more personable, we had brilliant Joy over here drawing our picture in the opening screen, as well as the picture for all this slide presentation. Amazing. And ultimately, with the end user in mind, our main design principles have been around ensuring clarity and usability. We are focused on translating complex migration law concepts into plain language. Simplicity, as the app needs to be completed easily and quickly in order to meet strict deadlines. Clarity, as many users will have low levels of literacy. Mobile-friendly design, as people facing cancellation are often in prison or immigration detention. And highly structured questions in order to minimise the opportunity for mistakes.
Now we come back to Stephen's story. He is preparing to respond to Jane's notice, but he isn't sure how to. A Google search takes him to the visa cancellation guide. He sees the first page of the app and immediately knows that this is what he's looking for. The next page lets him know what he needs with him to complete the app. Before he begins, he knows he will need a copy of Jane's visa, all communications from the Department of Home Affairs, and her identity documents. This will help speed up the process for Stephen.
I'm worried about Jane. She just received a letter notifying her that she's facing visa cancellation.
If Stephen had previously downloaded the authority form and filled it out with Jane, he could upload it now. In this case, he hasn't, and so the app allows him to download a copy of the form. Once Stephen has completed the form, he can click yes and upload it.
Jane is currently in Australia, and we want to stay in Australia.
Our app then uses hints to help Stephen locate the grounds under which Jane's visa was cancelled. Then, on the basis of those grounds, we limit the types of notice he can choose to prevent mistakes. This is because the type of notice can be difficult to identify, but it has a huge impact on their rights and the amount of time that they have to access those rights.
I know we received Jane's letter by post, and using these helpful hints, I can easily find the information I need on the notice to complete this form.
Once Stephen selects a date, the app will calculate the deadline for responding and present it to him. This is a vital function of the app, as determining the due date for a response is one of the most confusing aspects of the cancellation process. This slide shows the complicated logic needed to determine the deadline, which the app translates into 3 easy questions. How did you receive your notice? What are your grounds? And what kind of notice did you receive? The app does the rest. This page clearly sets out a due date. We added the countdown of days after user testing suggested it more clearly communicated the urgency of the response. This allows users to plan their response or spur them to complete the app immediately.
Now I know the deadline. I don't have a lot of time, so I definitely want to make a submission now.
With the assistance of helpful hints and question validation, Stephen is able to enter all of Jane's personal details from her notice. Another vital function of the app is that it allows users to select from a number of circumstances that might apply to them, improving the quality and impact of their initial response to the minister. Stephen can choose multiple circumstances or none if none apply.
Jane's deportation will badly affect our daughter. She's only 5 years old. Jane also regularly volunteers. She's definitely a part of the Australian community. And she's lived in Australia for more than 10 years.
After completing the form, Stephen can check what will be sent to the minister. Once he's sure he wants to submit, he can upload his signature or proof of ID. He must also enter his email to confirm his response.
I'm so relieved to know that I've submitted an initial response for Jane. I have some time before I need to pick up my daughter, so I think I'm going to keep going with the second part of this app to figure out what else I need to do to submit a response, or submit a more detailed response. On the next page, this hint tells me that the Section 5013 cancellation means the minister cancelled Jane's visa because she was in jail for more than 12 months. That's not true. She's only been sentenced to 6 months.
In order to complete this section, Stephen will have to answer more questions about Jane's circumstances. This section translates a complicated government document into plain English. At the end of the process, Stephen can send the document to himself and to his lawyer.
Using these free resources, I can get representation for Jane. And now that I have this report, I can more easily explain my situation to those lawyers.
The final output is useful for a number of reasons. First, time-pressed lawyers can use the report as a starting off point for further legal advice and to help triage clients. The app also recognizes that some users might not have access to a lawyer. It can direct such people to free legal resources such as the Visa Cancellations Working Group. And if for some reason the users are unable to take advantage of those free legal services, they can download the final report and use it as their response to the minister. The app also provides a checklist to help the user gather relevant documents and evidence to support a more detailed response to the minister.
Thank you very much for listening to my story. This concludes our presentation, and we'll now open up to questions.
Thank you, guys. That was an excellent presentation. I love the artwork. Did you think about accessibility issues in preparing this app, about language difficulties and perhaps even, you spoke about comprehension, but about accessibility from other perspectives as well? And what was available to you? How could you challenge that?
Absolutely, that's something that was at the forefront of our minds. We actually learnt some interesting facts about visa cancellation while doing this process. It turns out more than 50%, and by more than 50% we mean like a significantly more than 50% of cancellees are actually from New Zealand. So it turns out the level of English comprehension is a little bit higher than we initially might have thought, but we had considered also the issue of people who do speak English as a second language, and so our language in the app is, like we described, set at the age of a 10-year-old. So we kind of tried to take that into consideration.
We do provide hints throughout which you can click and it'll open up to explain further, like some of the other apps today.
So just to reiterate a question we ask everyone, what happens if in the middle of all of this I stop and then I need to come back? Can I save the work I've done already?
So you want to take them?
No, go ahead.
So unfortunately, as we've discovered, you can't actually save the session without creating an account. So while if you did get bored and quit out, it wouldn't really be in your best interest. But it's ideally you would. So that's why we've streamlined that first section, because that's probably the most important part. Well, after that, you're free to exit out, but that's why, with that in mind, we tried to keep it as streamlined, get the important stuff out first.
One of the biggest issues that we discovered through talking to the visa cancellations working group, and I'm sure it's pretty obvious, is time. And because often they have quite short deadlines. And so, and keeping in mind that we knew that they couldn't save, we split the app into two sections and really pushed at the beginning to get that initial response out, and then the second stage is significantly longer. Like we skipped like 10 or 12 pages.
Some stills we had.
Because that part takes significantly longer, but we push them really as hard as we can through the first part to get that response to the minister, because that initial response almost puts a pause. Exactly. And then they can take the time to get legal resources, get legal representation that they might not know how to right away, and it just gives them more time to take a breath and reassess the situation.
I noticed some of the. Sorry, please. Karen.
No, I was just saying, once they get to section 2, there's something saying that they can take a break and keep going, because we checked with Neota, and as long as they keep the screen open, there's a very generous timeout time period. So if they just want to have a breather, they can, but as long as they keep the screen open on their phone or laptop.
I noticed some of the language was quite forceful in the app. You're interested in this now, and you've got something. Was that part of your brief from your client? That's what they really wanted to emphasise?
We were a little bit less. I think we're a little bit less forceful, and we were told to be more forceful. Yeah.
So a lot of the screens and everything you showed were sort of mobile-centric in their UI. Yeah. I noticed there were options there to upload documents and things like that. That's a little awkward on mobile. How do you guys reconcile those?
So with the mobile upload, if you click upload, I think you can just upload a picture. So with that, in that situation, you probably have to take a picture on your phone of the signature or the authority form and then upload that picture. Whereas on the computer, you'd have a bit more option, like PDFs or Word document.
Right.
It's the exact same on desktop. So
right. So that I get it. That'd be cool.
And then.
Okay, and also at the end, I believe you had a option to download your final report, right?
Yep.
Can you also email it to yourself or something like that?
We skipped through that a little bit just because our app's so long. But for the first response, you get an email. It's sent off to the department, but you also you have to put in your email because you get sent a confirmation that the response has been sent. And then at the end of the second one, you have the option not only to put in your email, but also to put in your lawyer's email if you have one.
But one has to be selected at least.
The primary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And one of the big reasons we did that as well is because we really want the second part to be, it doesn't get sent to the minister, and we actually make that quite clear, the second report, but we want it to be like a fact sheet that they can either bring to their legal advisor or whoever they need to explain the situation to. So it was actually really important to us that it was given to them in a few different forms, so you can download it in PDF or Word, and have it emailed to them and have it emailed to their lawyer. So that was really important for us.
That being said, we're cognizant that people might not have lawyers, so they can download it and send it themselves. It's in a form that's ready to go. It's just we prefer that they see a solicitor.
Sure.
Any
A beautiful
questions?
presentation. Thank you very much.
So we are to our final presentation, the client court report developed for Victoria Legal Aid.
Excellent, thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your attention. We are the Law Apps team who work closely with Victoria Legal Aid this semester to design and build an app for their lawyers. I'm Monica, and we have Emily, Cherie, Ben, and Elizabeth. VLA's Child Protection Division deals with cases where children are at risk of harm or neglect. Over 5,000 child protection applications are made every year, and VLA wanted us to make an app for their lawyers to streamline their post-court process. For the lawyers to use this app, it needed to be quick, easy, and user-friendly. Before we explain to you what we've created, Emily here will take you through understanding our user group.
So we think the best way for you to understand our user group is through a hypothetical, because lawyers love hypotheticals, as very clearly evident tonight. This is based off our experience shadowing at the Children's Court. So let's introduce you to two key people. This is Rachel. She's 27, she's just gotten out of an abusive relationship, and she's got some alcohol issues. Rachel has two children, Brandon and 5-year-old Ashley. Last week, social workers took Ashley out of Rachel's care because they're worried about her safety. How's Rachel feeling in all this? As I'm sure you can imagine, she's very overwhelmed, vulnerable, and feeling quite anxious about how she gets her daughter back. Now meet Laura. Laura is Rachel's lawyer from VLA. She's really busy. She has an average of 6 to 8 cases a day and spends her time juggling between negotiating with the other parties and meeting clients. How's Laura feeling? She's stressed, her days are chaotic, but she's trying to do her best managing the competing demands. It's time for Rachel's hearing. An application has been made for an interim accommodation order. Given Rachel doesn't have any family nearby, the magistrate agrees that it's best for Ashley to go to foster care. Everybody in the courtroom is using complicated legal language and things are happening fast. Rachel also hasn't slept properly in weeks, and this is making it harder for her to understand exactly what is happening. The case is adjourned, the clerk says all rise, and it's over. Rachel's upset and she's confused, but Laura only has around 30 seconds to explain what's happened because she's late to appear for her next client in the next courtroom. So how can we summarise their respective issues? In talking to the lawyers at VLA, and from what we noticed at court, it comes down to two things: time and communication. Rachel needs more time with her lawyer, but Laura's workload means that she's unable to give this. Legal language is also a really big barrier. Rachel doesn't understand the words that magistrates and lawyers routinely use. We all know how much terminology and statutory concepts get thrown around. From Laura's perspective, she goes back to the office at VLA to write a letter for Rachel. The process goes something like this. As you can see, it's really long and involves a lot of correspondence back and forth between Laura and her legal assistants. 2 to 3 weeks later, Rachel receives a letter that looks something like this. Despite VLA and Laura's best efforts, it's pretty long, overwhelming, and the key information that Rachel needs really isn't standing out. This is unsatisfactory as many clients like Rachel feel like they don't have control over their matter. Shree's going to talk about how we can do better.
Our task from VLA was to enhance client experience, taking advantage of the innovative technologies we have on offer. Now, to get a holistic perspective, we shadowed the duty lawyers at the Children's Court and also spent time observing the legal assistants at the VLA. Now, we believe both of their experiences could be improved by first creating an easy and efficient way for lawyers to communicate with their clients after a post-court event, and then to also design documents that are fundamentally client-focused. Now, our team's proposed solution, the Client Court Reporter, CCR, radically transforms and streamlines the 8-step process into 3 simple steps. The real benefit of this app is that the lawyers can complete the entire process in the same amount of time as it takes them to currently dictate a letter. Ben will now take you through the app in detail and we'll talk about its functionality.
So as you can see, this is the CCR app. It is optimised for both desktop and mobile, which is making it accessible for lawyers, whether they're in the office or in the courtroom. Throughout our development journey through this app, we took a very user-centric approach. The general feedback that we received from our user testing was the colour of the Go button or the Next button. Green for Go was the common sentiment among the people that we consulted with. Also we took our time to look to the lawyer's perspective and we asked them what they would like from the app. And the 2 major things that they would like were to see what the app would provide them with and what the time commitment for the app would be, as well as what they would need to complete it. So if, just with the current screen here, we can see that the app itself is consistent with the current VLA colour scheme. That just allows for seamless transition between what they currently have online and the app itself. The border itself is just up there on the screen. It boasts diversity and inclusion because of the Aboriginality of the artwork, and we thought that was a very good thing. So if we continue to the first page of the app, we can see that the app is largely pre-filled, but in the default answers that we have set, Victoria Legal Aid is the only default answer. It allows for that seamless transition. And in the case that the lawyer did not appear on behalf of the client that day, they are able to input another lawyer's name if necessary. If we move on to the second page here, we can see that there's a drop-down box for the title, which is just for seamless and easy use. And down the bottom, we have toggle buttons. So the toggle buttons allow you to go between each client and see whether the child's name is required for moving forward within the app, because this is inherently about child protection. One thing that we should note here also is that up the top, there is a progress bar going through each of the 3 steps, just to let you know how your time management is going within the app. Now, if we go to the third page of the app, this is the core of our app. This part allows us to input all the information that will output a file note and a client letter that is tailored specifically to the circumstances of the case. So you can see at the top that the court name, that will be pre-filled, as well as the court location. If you click on the drop-down box, it shows all the locations of courts within Victoria, and it allows you to select where your case had been heard. There's toggle buttons also on this screen. So if we go down to the court order section, it has not decided or final decided orders, which allows you to distinguish between those 2. And the drop-down boxes for each of those has different orders, and selecting each order will allow follow-up questions to tailor the reports that are generated at the end to each individual case. One final thing to note on this page is just the hovers over each of the orange highlighted sections. So those are just to prompt the lawyer to understand exactly what is required within this field. And the final functionality that we have is that the court order can be uploaded and digitised so that that is easily kept as a record. So if we go through to the final page now, this is just the report page where it generates the reports. You can see that the Word documents and PDF links are up there. The Word documents allow for the lawyer to easily edit the letter and the file note that we provide through this app. We'll just have a look at what one of the file notes looks like now. Yep, so as you can see, it's got the file note up here, and I believe you have one with you. It has the client details, case information, and the lawyer details there. As well as up here, we have a screenshot of one of the emails that has been sent out to one of our email addresses. This is user-friendly, quick, and accessible for the lawyers at court. It helps them also transition from the current paper-based system within the Child Protection Division at VLA to a more digitised version of record keeping. I'm just going to pass on to Elizabeth now to talk to you about how this will positively impact the client.
Our letter for Rachel provides easy, plain, and simple information about what just happened in court and what Rachel needs to do next. Our client-centric approach is highlighted through our use of personal language and design elements, including our colour coding and font choices, which makes the letter very easy to read and understand. And this was also confirmed in our user testing by people who are unfamiliar with the law. We also used bolded text, an abundance of white space, numeration, and dot points. These elements make the most important information immediately apparent. For example, in our letter, Rachel's next court date is coloured in blue, and where Ashley, her daughter, is staying is coloured in orange. Rachel is able to easily locate the key information she needs to know. Throughout the letter, we used short sentences, and the letter is designed with colourblind readers in mind in order to further accessibility and inclusion in our community. The overall impact of our letter allows for Rachel to feel much more in control of her own case. And I'll pass it on to Monica to conclude.
Finally, we'd like to give a massive thank you to VLA, that is Lucia, Vincenzo, Priscilla, Clara, Akila and Jessica, and within class, Gary, Kenji and Jessie. Also, anyone and everyone who has helped us with user testing, a big thank you. And that's our client court reporter. Thank you.
Great, guys. I liked how you, it seemed to me that you were solving the problem of the lawyer, but also helping to solve a problem for the client as well. So I'm interested to hear you talk a little bit more about that. How were you making those choices? Were you always focusing on the lawyer and then the client benefit was a secondary benefit that kind of came out of it, or did you go into it with that idea?
Mine was mainly front of mind because I think that's a really big issue, that clients having a really poor experience throughout this whole process, and it's quite emotional, so it's important that it's as simple for them as possible. Yeah. The design of the app was aimed with the lawyer in mind, so really short questions that were legally accurate, so that would be familiar to them and they would know how to answer it. Guidance is provided where that was more indicative of how the letter would be outputted. For the letter itself, we did a lot of research into design, different user experiences where the colours came into it, the spacing. Unfortunately, given the nature of the area, we weren't allowed access to the clients, so we circumvented that by testing the app with children we used to babysit and siblings, so to make sure that children could understand, and then testing with adults who are both familiar with the law, unfamiliar with the law, to really make sure the questions were appropriate.
Great, thanks.
Can I ask, obviously you're balancing off here between complexity of the information that's going back to the client and capturing all the information that the person needs, and that's a very difficult thing to balance. But things where, and you're generous enough to give us the letter, which means we've got an opportunity to comment on it. So point 3, you say, yeah. You know, and I'm only allowed one question because I really want to ask about 2 of the docs. But anyway, but you say we talked about something called conditions, and remember that basically. Now, how easy was it to make a decision about not capturing the information that the person might need? Rachel might need around the conditions?
That was both on trying not to overwhelm the client and really making sure she, at this point, needs to know, when are you coming back to court next? Yeah. What's my phone number if you have any questions? And where is my daughter? Yeah. They're the 3 key things. But to make sure lawyers use it, particularly where VLA is currently used to dictating, the questions needed to be as simple as possible. And if there had been a follow-up with list all the conditions that the judges said, then you're going to tap out and you're not going to finish it. Yeah. So it was balancing that tension, so that's why it's as simple as it is.
Was it open to you to I noticed there was an option there for scanning in the order or for uploading the order. So I assume you could, as an output, have both the letter and the orders.
Yes, so within the email output, if you upload an attachment of the court order, it digitises that and sends it out with the email that these can be sent out with as well.
Cool.
Also on the final screen, we had the option to download it if you didn't want to email out. So there was the both functionalities there. So if you didn't want to email it, you could have downloaded it instead.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Great.
So I have a question. So I assume that this is one of those cases where you assume the primary user, the lawyer, is actually going to have an account. So they have saved information and you can pre-fill a lot of those fields?
Yeah, so we have thought about that, and at this point we don't have that functionality, but because of the limited nature of the people that will be using it, it would be quite beneficial to implement, I believe.
But I think as well, our app has 3 screens, and you can keep one of those tabs open for up to 3 hours, and that information's not going to go anywhere. So if you get a call and you're interrupted and you've inputted lawyer details, client details, and you're halfway through matter, you have a quite significant time window where that's not going to disappear.
Okay. And another small question, because I've had this with things like this where it generates documents for you. When you click on download the document, is the file name the same every single time, or do you modify the file name based on some of the details entered?
The file name is client letter. Neota is limited where you can't input a variable into the download name. But in that sense, the lawyers automatically emailed a copy, and that email is customised to the subject line with the client's name, client ID, so that they have very quick access through that to get to the direct letter.
Okay.
Really great, guys. Thank you so much.
Well, that concludes the presentations. I'm sure you'll agree that I have been a very, very lucky person to teach this class. Amazing work. And they've dealt with the judges' questions, I thought, extremely well as well. So the judges are going to take time to deliberate. You can just relax for a little while, and they'll come back in a short while. Thank you.
Yeah. What's that? There are 2 of them that I think are the lead contenders for me. The one I have for
Sorry, we just take a quick photo. Quick. I have no idea how to do it. Oh, maybe I can't. That's all we have. That's all we have.
Gabby.
Oh, in the corner. Okay, okay, okay.
Well said. Just like that in there, right? Just like that, It'd be funny if the next slide is our answers are. Yeah, we've already got the answers. We already got the winners. It's all just an act. Yeah.
I'd love to. And I usually do.
I think it's incumbent on the Dean to make sure that you do. Can I shut this though? Does that? No. Yeah, shut. Because I'm just so IT savvy, I have to ask whether I can shut the laptop before we go to the final presentations. I've got to say, when I was asked to join this panel tonight, and I went home last night to my 19-year-old and 16-year-old and said where I was coming tonight, they said, "Mum, what would you know about any of that?" So if I could just take it as read that we have learned, all of the panel, I think, have learned a formidable amount. All of the panel feels that we have been inspired by the next generation, by the way in which you've creatively responded to the briefs that you were given, and the ways in which you seem to have really enjoyed creatively responding to the briefs you were given. So once again, just before we move to the final result, I really do want to keep you on the edge of your chairs. I think we really do need to thank our partners and for bringing these problems, these challenges to the students and asking them to work with them. So I'd really like us to thank our partners first. And before we get to the announcing the successes of the evening, we want to make an honourable mention. All of the panel was particularly impressed by client court reporter VLA. We saw in that particular offering something sleek, something simple and something impactful, and we could all imagine how much easier the life of a VLA lawyer might be as a result of your work. So honourable mention, very well done. Now, I know we were given criteria, and of course we've rigorously stuck to them, and some of us have used metrics and others have used little stars. But at the end of the day, what separated success from being sort of a hair's breadth away from success was what we landed on as describing as innovation and flourish. Flourish isn't actually a technical term in the criteria. We had a quick look at that, but the sponsor suggested flourish, and we ran with it. All of the applications were so strong that it became very, very hard to separate them out, and flourish is probably one of the concepts on which we landed. Innovation, and also dealing with the complexity. And just on that, we noted as a panel that the scope of the problem is something that you work with in the context of the brief, and so hence the importance or significance we placed on flourish. Anyway, now you are really edgy. You've got a very august panel here. We've got international, community sector, legal and academic, and despite an agonising discussion, we couldn't split two teams. And so there's a ripple across the room. Steve is going to deliver prizes to two teams. And I'm going to announce those teams in alphabetical order. The first team to win the August Prize in 2018 is Bail Helper. And the second team to share the award in 2018 is the Visa Project. In true university style, every single person in this room deserves an accolade. Can we have the members of Bail Helper up here now? Come over here, Steve.
Congratulations, guys. There's a certificate
Thank
for
you,
you
sir.
there. I'm told other elements of the prize will be delivered in due course. Thank you. Congratulations. Congratulations. And
And can we now have the members of the Visa team come up and join this group?
again, purely athletic. Congratulations. Well done. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well done.
Now, I'm about to hand over to Steve for the final word, but before I do that, I would just like to reiterate our thanks to HSF for supporting tonight, but also the subject. Thank you, Steve.
My pleasure. I'll be very brief because we've got some alcohol for you and you've earned it because it's gone on for hours. Forgive us, but we could have talked for days about all of these apps. I had a degree of trepidation too coming to this judging panel. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, and I've got to say I was exceptionally impressed and invigorated by what I saw. What we saw on display from your winners and from all of you was what it is to be a lawyer. You took a problem, you realised the bureaucracy of law and the challenge that non-legally trained people have, and you said, well, how can we solve that? And I could see that through all the apps, and it was really, I've got to say, really warming. You're an exceptionally talented generation. We can't wait to be working with you. So thank you so much for all of you for participating, and thank you, congratulations to the winners. Well done, guys. You did really well. And I think we will have a few drinks at the back of the room, so please feel free to stand up. John, I don't know if we can bring those in, but please feel free to stay around and congratulate your winning teams and congratulate all of you for making it to the end of this session. Thanks, everyone.